We'd like to welcome you and say good evening to this public information session sponsored by the Prison Relocation Commission. My name is Alexis Cairo, and I'm an adjunct professor of communication at the University of Utah, and I'll be your moderator tonight. Before we get started, we'd like to thank Grantsville High School for letting us meet here tonight. As the staff said, they were awesome, so thank you for that. And what I would thank you, Grantsville High School. And as I said, we have a lot of questions to go through, and I can tell you right now we're not going to get through all of them, but we hope we can get through most of the questions that you have. But before we get started, we'd like to have a few welcoming comments from Mayor Brent Marshall.
Thank you. You guys really don't know how great it is to see the auditorium nearly full. So I say welcome to you, and thank you for coming to show your support. The City Council and I appreciate it more than you know. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the local officials, including the Tooele County School District, county commissioners, the Tooele City Council, our state representatives, the civic leaders from Rush Valley, Vernon, Ophir, Wendover, and Stockton for their support throughout this process. I would also like to thank Mayor Dunleavy for his unwavering support and dedication to this issue. He has stood shoulder to shoulder with Grantsville City throughout this entire process. Thank you, Mayor. This is our time to let the PRC know that we do not wish to have the prison located in our community. There have been many comments as to why the prison needs to be moved, but there are many times over that number as to why it should not be moved. We feel that this prison move is going to cause our great-great-grandchildren to be left with an unnecessary tax burden. Issues as large as this should be put before the citizens of the state for a vote to be determined its outcome. Not decided in a back room with a wink and a nod. This is one of the most important decisions our legislation has had to deal with in years. It is not a local issue, it is a statewide issue. There is enough vacant ground at the current site to facilitate the footprint the size the PRC is seeking. But the legislation has so narrowly tailored the PRC's direction, it cannot even consider the land right before its face. The PRC's directive is so narrow, it is like looking through a keyhole with both eyes. The state acts as though our ground has no value, but they're wrong. It has a lot of economic value to the city of Grantsville, Tooele County School District, and the state of Utah. Why should Draper be allowed to pass its burden on to another community and prosper while that other community is saddled with the facility that has no capacity to provide for it? Tooele County has more land controlled by the government than in almost any other county in the state. But because this land is not taxed at an assessed value, the county receives a PILT fund, which stands for payment in lieu of taxes, but in reality equates to pennies in lieu of thousands. By taking 500 acres to build a prison, it will remove that land from the tax scrolls forever. This will not provide any benefit to our city, the county, or the school district. The members of the state have continually referred to the future Silicon Valley of Draper. I don't believe that Draper will become a Silicon Valley, as there is only one Silicon Valley, and it's in California. This is flawed logic, and only is an economical loss to the state if the proposed business refuses to come to Utah. If it can't have the site at the prison and is located on Draper. If that same company locates just south of the point of the mountain, it is still in Utah and still brings the same benefits. The state indicates that this area is prime for high-tech industry. Why can't it go someplace else? It seems several of these types of businesses are already locating in northern Utah County. It is only an economic loss if the locating company does not move to the state solely based on the fact that they couldn't locate on the Draper site due to the prison. The PRC claims the prison in our community will provide jobs. Despite these facts, these jobs are currently filled. Those few jobs that may become available at the proposed prison will require special training with post certification. Most of our citizens do not have these credentials. The accessory businesses that they mention would be done on state bid, providing services to the prison. Most of the local companies would not be able to provide those services. The proposed prison is different from the prison located in Gunnison. At build-out, the Gunnison prison will house 1,500 inmates, as opposed to the 7,500 at the proposed prison site here. In fact, in 2005, the state approached Gunnison City about an expansion at its prison with a capacity of 2,000 inmates, an offer which Gunnison declined. The proposed prison will house death row and is where capital punishment orders will be carried out, making Grantsville City a media spectacle every time there is an execution. It will also house the Women's Center and a youth correctional facility. Mayor Blackham cannot speak on how the prison will affect Grantsville City or Tooele County, as the facility in Gunnison is not a reflection of the proposed prison. He only knows the effects of a minimum security prison in his community, not a supermax with executions. Mayor Blackham may feel free to go back to Gunnison at any time tonight, where you were elected to run your community, not ours. If this prison is truly an opportunity and a blessing for a community, feel free to take it with you when you go.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. So I want to talk, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this panel discussion the way we are tonight. A lot of people have said, well, why can't we ask questions directly? I want to, this is just what we have so far. We have a lot of questions tonight, and our objective is to get through as many topics as we can in the limited time that we have, and that's why we really need to go through this process to guide the discussion. So, as I said, we are going to get through as many questions as we can. There are a lot of duplicates, a lot of the same issues, but if you do have a question that you want to have answered, you have not submitted a card, raise your hand and some of the team here will get you a card. You can fill it out, pass it to the end of your row, and they'll bring it around and we'll get it up here, and hopefully we'll have time to answer those questions. And we see that some of you have signs, and that is great, but we just have a favor to ask, not just for us, but for those in the audience. Please refrain from holding them up too much so people behind you can see. Please know that there is, as you know, an ongoing open house right next door, so if you haven't had a chance to review the displays or to talk with representatives of the PRC, the open house will be going on until we conclude tonight, and we are concluding at 9 o'clock. Just so you know, we are videotaping tonight's session, and it will be posted on the PRC website over the next few days. So, before we begin the panel discussion, the co-chair of the Prison Relocation Commission, Representative Brad Wilson, will make a few brief remarks. Then I'll kind of review the process again for asking these questions, and we'll get started. Representative Wilson. Oh, you know what? You need a microphone, don't you? There we go. Sorry about that. There you go. You can set that down. Thanks.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. As Alexis said, my name is Brad Wilson. I serve in the House of Representatives, and just give you some context tonight and kind of kick things off if I can. In 2011, the legislature made a determination that it was appropriate to study the pros and cons of building a new prison and building it potentially either in Draper or in a new location. And in the wake of that decision, two different groups have studied whether or not to move the state prison and whether to build a new one. And in both instances, the consultants, as well as those groups, made a determination that it was in the best interest of the state, in fact, to build a new prison. In 2014, the legislature and the governor chose to move the prison. At that time, the Prison Relocation Commission was formed and specifically charged with finding a new location for the prison, which is in Draper right now. In 2015, this last session we just concluded, we also funded the construction of a new prison when a site is located. In the course of the last 12 months, we've gone from somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or more potential sites for the new location of the prison down to where we're at today, which is 4. This has been an in-depth and very thoughtful evaluation process that's occurred. And as you know, enthusiastically tonight, I might add, one of those sites is located in your community. You're enthusiastic about it. We've definitely heard you so far tonight. Public feedback is important as we move through this process. We understand, as members of the PRC, that you have questions and concerns. Hopefully the stations in the adjacent room and the question and answer session that's occurred over there have been helpful so far. We've strived diligently to keep your community leaders informed, and we've been informed by them, of course, through this process that you have concerns and that we know that they have concerns. We have a two-step process that we're in the middle of right now as we engage the public. The first step is where we're at currently, doing these informational events in 3 different locations across the state to share accurate information about what the new prison site is and isn't. The second stage of the process will be a formal public hearing. That actually is being announced today. It's going to be Tuesday, June 16th, and it will be at the state capitol. In preparation for that public hearing, we have the ability for you to fill out these cards tonight, and there are also comment cards that you can complete. All of those will be compiled and given to all of the members of the Prison Relocation Commission for their review prior to the commission making its recommendation to the legislature and the governor. We are not here whether to discuss we're moving the prison or not. The PRC's mission and directive has been to determine a place to move the prison to. That decision, whether or not we're moving the prison, has already been made by the legislature. This decision was reaffirmed this last session when the governor and the legislature appropriated funding to build the new prison. So our responsibility is to determine how and where, in fact, to do that. It's my sincere hope, as well as that of my co-chair, Senator Stevenson, and the other members of the panel here tonight, that we're able to answer your questions tonight thoroughly and make sure that we address any concerns that you might have. So.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. And I'm going to ask, because we do have a limited amount of time and so many questions, I'm going to ask you to try and hold applause and cheers if you can so we can get through a lot of questions. Again, you'll have a chance to actually publicly comment at the public hearing on June 16th. As Representative Wilson said, all of these comments, along with some of the feedback from the open house, will be posted on the PRC website, so you can find it there. So for the rest of the evening, we brought together this panel of experts to answer your questions. And I want to take a minute and introduce the panel. And panel members, if when I mention your name, you could raise your hand and let us know who you are. Roland Cook worked in Salt Lake County's corrections system for 23 years, ultimately serving as chief deputy. After retiring from the county, he worked closely with the National Institute of Corrections, and he's been a nationally recognized consultant, trainer, and motivational speaker on corrections-related topics. Governor Gary Herbert appointed Rollin to be the executive director over the Utah Department of Corrections in April of 2013. Ron Gordon is the executive director of the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice and a member of the Prison Relocation Commission. He serves as the Criminal Justice Policy Advisor to Governor Herbert. He received his Bachelor of Science degree from Brigham Young University and his Juris Doctor from the University of Utah. Bruce Blackham is the current mayor of Gunnison, serving his third term. Before he became mayor, Mayor Blackham served as the Sanpete County Commissioner for 2 terms. He's also been a loyal employee at Rocky Mountain Power for the past 39 years. Brad Sassatelli is Vice President with MGT America and is the project manager for the consulting team assisting the PRC. He has more than 30 years of experience working in criminal justice and corrections and has assisted states and counties across the country in identifying and addressing critical prison and jail issues. He's also spent 23 years working in a state correctional system. Bob Nardi is Senior Vice President with Lewis Berger. He's an expert on planning and siting of correctional facilities, and over a 40-year career has led the planning, siting, and development of more than 80 federal, state, and local correctional institutions in 41 states. He's a member of the consulting team assisting the PRC and is leading the correctional facility siting efforts. Mr. Nardi received both his bachelor's and master's degrees from Rutgers University. Senator Jerry Stevenson is a Republican member of the Utah State Senate, representing District 21 since 2010. Senator Stevenson is the co-chair of the Prison Relocation Commission. He served as the mayor of Layton City, a Weber State University trustee, chair of Wasatch Integrated Energy, and chair of the UTA Rail Committee. Senator Stevenson graduated from Utah State University with a degree in business and economics. And again, you've met Representative Brad Wilson, who is a Republican member of the Utah House of Representatives, representing District 15 since 2011. Representative Wilson also serves as co-chair, as you know, of the Prison Relocation Commission. He's also president and CEO of Destination Homes. He has served as vice president with American Express Financial Advisors, chair of the Davis Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, the chair of the Davis Economic Advisory Council. He received his bachelor's degree in business from Weber State University. So that is your panel, and we're going to get started. So our first question, a lot of questions on water. So these are questions that will go, I think, initially to Bob Nardi. The question, how do you propose getting the water since we're already lowering our wells because we're running out of water? Bob?
We heard the issue of water repeatedly during the open house a few minutes ago, and here's how we're approaching this. Focusing strictly on the site that's here in Grantsville at the moment. Fundamental to operating a correctional facility is a reliable, long-term, high-quality water supply source. And our approach to dealing with water supply, whether it be in Grantsville or any of the sites that we've looked at over the last year or so, is to be a partner and a customer to the host community's water supply and wastewater treatment departments. We don't want to be in the water supply business. We want to partner. We want to use the investments that need to be made to serve the prison with water and sewer service to the betterment of the community as a whole, as well as to the prison. In this particular case in Grantsville, the site we're looking at has a couple of unique aspects to it, but first and foremost is the owner of the property also owns significant volumes of water rights. And without water rights, you really have very little ability to develop property. Whether we build a water supply system on the property or whether we partner with the city of Grantsville, water rights are going to be fundamental to that solution. And our preference is to partner with the city, but the fact that the owner has the water rights and the state would have to acquire those water rights gives us the flexibility to develop a water supply system on site. If it turns out that we need to develop a supply on site, the state will have to go through all the tests and all the requirements and all the permits that anyone who's drilling a well will have to do, except we're not going to be a homeowner, we're going to be a large facility. So the research is currently underway to verify those water rights, make sure that they are reliable, available, serve the purposes that we have for the facility, and whether we build a system or we partner with the city, those water rights are going to be front and center. But beyond merely having water rights, you have to get permits and approvals from the state. And the dialogue has already been started with the state water engineer to understand where every other well is in the vicinity of the property, what aquifers are being tapped, which ones have reliable, long-term, dependable supply, which ones are available to the owner of the water rights, and how do we go about planning, designing, testing, and ultimately producing water on that site. We'll have to respect all the other wells in the area so they're not affected by it. So we don't have the answer as to what aquifer and how deep and how many gallons per minute yet a well will produce. But if it turns out we need to develop our own on-site water supply system, we're going to follow the procedures that the state outlines in terms of taking advantage of rights, testing the well, making sure it's got the adequate supply and quality, and more importantly, making sure no one else's wells are disrupted by it. But like I said at the beginning of this answer, we don't want to be in the water supply business. We want to use the investment that's going to be made to support the prison, to support the Grantsville Water Department, supply it with the rights that are needed, and help make the system serve the prison and be more reliable long-term for the citizens of Grantsville. So that's how we're approaching the water supply issue.
Our next question is about education. It's a three-part question. I'll take it one at a time. Who is responsible for educating prison inmates? Roland, maybe you can take that.
We actually have a variety of people that perform that duty for us, beginning with our programming folks, caseworkers. We also have educational folks, teachers that provide high school education, also GED. We also have people that come in from Davis Applied Technologies that also teach our inmates different job skills. We're in the process of even changing the way that we do our corrections industries, where we're going to be changing things so that we start to prepare them for jobs in the community, and working actually with private sector folks that that are willing to hire them upon release. So the answer is that we have some staff that provide that training, including correctional officers, different programming folks that come in, and then also volunteers. A variety of folks provide that.
Another question is, how is that funded? Who pays for this?
Well, it's similar to the way I just explained it. Some of it is volunteer, and we couldn't really make it without our volunteers, to be honest. Per capita, we have the largest amount of volunteers that work for the Department of Corrections, come in and provide volunteer hours than any other state in the country. So part of that is funded basically through volunteers. The other part is part of our budget that we pay for our correctional officers and our programming staff, social workers, and so on.
Okay. What services are provided to inmates that are released? Grantsville has hardly any low-level entry jobs to help with their rehabilitation. Ron or Roland, you want to
I'll take the first part of it, and then I'll pass it on to Ron, because there's a lot of good things that are coming along with justice reinvestment. We prepare the inmates for reentry. In fact, Ron will talk in just a few minutes how we are reinvesting in that particular piece. That is a key component. From the time that the inmate walks into the door, we begin the process of identifying what challenges they have, substance abuse, mental illness, so on and so forth, and prepare a plan and get them prepared for reentry into the communities. Those folks they're not just released right to the streets. Oftentimes people think, for example, similar to Shawshank Redemption, they don't just walk out the door. We make sure that they, one, either are going home with their family members, or they're being taken to, for example, a halfway house, or to their home where they're going to be staying. So they're not just released out the door, and that process begins preparing them for transition from the first day they get in there.
Ron, let me ask you to follow up on the issue of jobs.
Sure.
Ron or Roland, you want to follow up? The question was too, we don't have a lot of jobs here, that might be, applicable to inmates who are released. So how does the city deal with that?
Are you asking, I guess I need a little bit more
The question-
clarification.
the
Are you
question
talking
was-
about inmates going to work in the community?
Yes, it says Grantsville has hardly any low-level entry jobs or help to continue their rehabilitation.
Okay, well, inmates won't be released just into Tooele County, for example, only if they live there currently. So even our folks that we have there right now, if they have family, if they have support groups that they're going to live with, so for example, here in Grantsville, if they have family that lives here, then they would be released to the family members here to be able to live with them. Otherwise, we want them to be with people that are going to help them. So they go to their homes, to their families that live in other parts of the state. So we actually have them going, depending on where they currently live, to those resources.
Okay. With public transportation being limited, how will family members of inmates and prison employees who rely on mass transit get to and from the prison? Bob? Take that one.
Fundamental to the siting process for this facility is the recognition that we're relocating an existing facility. We're not building a new facility that people can make decisions about where they will live in relationship to it. We're moving an existing facility and have to recognize, as Roland just said a moment ago, you've got an abundance of volunteers who come from their homes to the institution every day. You've got the workforce, which makes up a large percentage of the people we're concerned about, who we want to make sure stays with the department and doesn't change jobs because their commute has suddenly gotten too long. And visitors as well. Visitors are fundamental to the rehabilitation of the inmates as well, and we want to maintain connections to the visitors, the volunteers, and the workforce. And a big part of the reason why the sites that we're focusing on today and the sites we've been focusing on from the very beginning are within a reasonable distance of drive time to Draper is that we need to keep those relationships intact. We're confident that the sites that are under consideration for the relocation will not significantly affect the relationships between the workforce, the volunteers, and the visitors. The site in Eagle Mountain doesn't have mass transit service. There's no real transit service out to the site in Salt Lake City. And while transit is a very, very important aspect of operating any facility like this, it's really not available outside the core concentration of the population in Salt Lake County. So it's an important aspect. You know, we would like to think that if the facility does go to a place like Grantsville, that we've got enough time between now and the time the facility opens to make adjustments and help facilitate visitors to make the trip, set up van pools or car pools or sharing services and things of that nature. But we're very cognizant of wanting to be close by and keep those relationships intact. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of transit service in some of these remote locations, and that was just something that we weren't able to accommodate as best as we would like. But I think the sites are all close enough to maintain those relationships with the visitors and the inmates themselves.
Why is the state legislature thwarting attempts to put the prison relocation to a statewide referendum? Representative Wilson? We ask you to hold your applause so we can hear his answer. Thank you.
So, kind of talked a little bit about this already, Alexis, but over the course of the last 4 years, the legislature studied this issue in a number of different waves. And, you know, in this state, as in a lot of states actually, we function as a republic. We have 104 members of the legislature who've been elected by their communities to go to the Capitol on a regular basis and make decisions that they think are in the best interest of everyone in the state. And so,
Please, can we please we're not taking questions from the audience, so can you please let Representative Wilson finish? Thank you. Please go ahead.
So, I'll just continue if that's all right. So that's the process that we've been through. And the legislature 2 years ago, in a vote of 70-ish in the House, 70 of the 75 members voted it was in the best interest to move the prison. In the Senate, it was a similar ratio. So that's the process we have. Now, there are times that if citizens decide that they want to go a different direction, we have an initiative and a referendum process that they can initiate on their own. And so that is obviously an option. But that's the way the government in Utah functions as a republic.
That gets to the second part of the question, which is what can we do to put this to a statewide referendum? And what you're saying is there is a process for doing that. So, next question. What and where are the facility funds coming from? Now, I'm going to break that up because I think we're going to break it up into construction, where the funds are coming to build the prison, and then we'll talk about operational funds. But Senator Stevenson, maybe you can talk about where is the money coming from to build the prison?
During the last session, the legislature appropriated $80 million to start this process out of the current budget. That's one-time money, and we appropriated a bond of $470 million to move through the process. If during, if during maybe next year we don't come up with, we have another banner year like we've had, we will appropriate more cash and not use the bond on the backside. And that's where the money's coming from currently. It's coming out of the state budget. We do think that as we move through this process over the next, with our justice initiative that we're working on, the numbers that are coming back to us is there could be as much over the next 20 years as $525 million saved because of the way we could train inmates or train people and put them back out on the street and not have them go back. What we're really dealing with is not so much, we have a low incarceration rate in the state of Utah, but we are dealing with an increase, and we're trying to slow the increase or stop the increase and hold the population close to where it is now. So that's where the money is coming from. It's coming out of the general budget where it would normally come, and where all the money that goes to the Department of Corrections comes from.
And I think, Roland, you've answered this question about where you get your budget, but out of respect to the questioner, I want to make sure we do cover that if we're talking about operational budget.
Well, our operational budget comes from the general fund. I don't know that there's no plan for that to be any different. In fact, what we should see is more efficiencies coming from a new facility being built. Obviously, our site out there, much of it is very archaic, and HVAC, all those types of things is very old, all those types of things. So we'll see efficiencies in the types of facilities that we build just from those types of improvements.
This next question is specifically directed to Mayor Blackham. Tell us about challenges your city has faced regarding water and sewer since the prison came to your city. Mayor?
Very good. Thank you very much. May I, as I answer that question, just indicate that as my wife and I came to Grantsville today, we just feel like it's an honor and a privilege to be with you good folks. We appreciate your emotion. We appreciate your concern. And this community reminds me a lot of my community, a lot like my community, good, honorable, honest people. The question is the water.
Challenges, sewer and water.
Challenges with sewer and water. We have, we are in the midst, our community has been in need of an upgraded water system, and we are just spending now $9 million on a new water system that we've needed for 40 years, which is common amongst small towns. So we've funded that. We provide water for corrections, and they pay their fair share. Our rate schedules are such that they're graduated so that our bigger users pay a premium for that water. Corrections through the years has appropriated certain monies specifically for their impacts on our waters and sewer systems. And we've met with the legislature and with the department often, asking, not only asking, but planning and preparing not only for growth in our community and valley, but for potential needs at the prison. And so that's how we've handled it. They pay for it, and at this point we've been able to accommodate very adequately with their help.
So again, the question was challenges. So you're saying there were absolutely no challenges?
Oh, no,
when it
I'm
came
not
to
saying
water
there's
and
not
sewer?
challenges. I mean, whenever you go poking something in the ground, hoping you'll get water, you got challenges. I mean, you know, and all of that, and the funding, we've got all the funding. Listen, if you think this is going to happen without a challenge, that's not true. That's one thing that I know is not true. But we have a good relationship, and at this point, that's how we provide We've had the water rights.
Okay. I
Yeah,
ask
sewers, same thing.
Okay.
Same thing. We've upgraded our sewer systems. A number of years ago, we had a constricted line. Corrections came in and paid for that exclusively for their needs, and they've also agreed to limit their flows to certain times to accommodate us. So we feel like that's how we've handled it.
Thank you. Who is going to pay for the new infrastructure required to operate this out here? The infrastructure. Senator Stevenson, you want to take that one?
Infrastructure is normally put in by developers at the direction of communities. And I don't see this would be any difference. The state of Utah would be the developer. One interesting thing that would take place is if the state needed a 30-inch pipe to go to this site, they will not put in a 30-inch pipe. They will put in one much larger in cooperation with the city or the county, and they would put a pipe in that would accommodate additional future development, as not prison development, but additional development as far as industry that would come to the community. This is a normal way of doing it, and that's the way it would take place in this project. It would be engineered, and it would be put in according to what the future needs of that entire parcel of property were.
I think this next question refers obviously to the age of the current prison, which I think was built in 1951. So the question, and Brad, this might be one you can take. How many prisons in the USA are older than 1951?
I definitely don't have a count of it. There are some facilities that are much older than 1951. If you go to look at different states across the country, you'll see some that still exist that were built in the late 1880s. Are they efficient? No. Are they best place to operate a facility and try to change the behavior of inmates so that inmates, when they get released from the prison, don't return to our communities as better criminals? No, they're not designed for that. They don't have the space for that. The reason why a new facility is needed in the state of Utah is the current facility just doesn't have the design ability to improve and offer the programs that are needed to change the behavior of inmates. Inmates don't stay in prison forever. In fact, the average length of stay of an offender in a prison in Utah is a little over 2 years. When they get released, as Rollins said, they don't get released out the door of the prison. They come back to the communities, and thousands of inmates are released every year. And it's very likely, as you're going to the gas station, going to the grocery store, taking your family out on an evening, you'll encounter an offender, an ex-offender who's been released. And the question is, do you want them to be a better criminal, or do you want them to be a better citizen? And you have to have facilities that have the space and are designed in a way that allow you to provide the services and the programming necessary so that they can change their behavior and become better citizens.
Follow-up question to that from this questioner is, why is the current prison considered inhumane? Roland, that might be something you want to address.
Took a tour today and went through the mental health unit. And it's a facility that wasn't designed to house mentally ill. And there's a person on a floor in a cell without clothes on, in a facility that is not designed to help that person that is mentally ill prepare to be better. If any of you have any mentally ill family members like I do, you would understand that by placing someone in an environment like that, and that's the only place we have for the mentally ill, you're just making them worse. That type of facility or we see those types of problems throughout our current facility, no matter where it is. Again, I started in '89, Salt Lake County, and I've always been about being tough on crime. And I've learned a lot. I have a crooked nose because we tried to do everything by force, and it doesn't work. So the facilities that we need are very different from what we have there, where we can actually provide the care for those that need it, but also the right type of incarceration for those that we want kept behind bars for a long period of time. And those facilities that are there now are not conducive to that.
We have some questions, and Representative Wilson, you answered this in your opening comments, but we do have a couple of questions about why is it cheaper and more effective use of tax funds, federal, state, and local, to start over? Present facilities should be updated, not moved to less accessible desert. And again, why is the present location of the prison not being considered? I think it's worth talking about that again.
Alexis, if it's all right, I will answer that, but I'd like, while we're just on this with Roland, and maybe he could take another minute or two and talk just a little bit more about the current state of the prison in Draper, so people have a clear understanding of the challenges that corrections faces there, and then I'll specifically talk about why Draper is not the right solution moving forward.
So the facilities we have in Draper are a hodgepodge, as we've talked about. Some of it was built in the 50s, and back in the 50s, the way that corrections was looked at was to put the people as far away from everybody else as you possibly could. Many of the cells are very tiny. They're made, they wouldn't meet today's standards by any stretch of the imagination. There was basically the only type of things that they involved them to do was to take them out, work in the farm, so to speak, not necessarily prepare them to go back into the communities. As time rolled on into the 80s, again, the Tough on Crime initiative began, and that's also when they started to close down the mentally ill institutions across the country. So during that time, we started to incarcerate a lot of people. That's also when the 3 strikes initiatives and things began. What we found is that we're incarcerating everybody for long periods of time. And one thing that the evidence shows is that incarceration doesn't reduce recidivism. And we just keep paying millions and millions of dollars into housing these people in correctional facilities. That particular site there in Draper has that entire package, that whole mix from the 1950s to the 1980s, and none of it is conducive in being able to make the types of changes that we want to make in people when we return them to the community. It's completely dysfunctional, and whenever they needed more space, they'd put up a building and call it good. Again, took a tour today. The environment that our correctional officers and staff are working in is an absolute embarrassment to me that they have to be working in there. So I guess that is a quick overview of that site.
Thank you, Roland. So specifically, let me address a couple things, maybe in 2 different levels. One is, why do we need a new facility? I want Roland, who's in that facility almost every day, to kind of set the stage. But one of the things that's been a little bit of a surprise to me as I've learned more about this over the last 5 or 6 years is 97% of the individuals that the state of Utah sends to the prison are released. Brad has already mentioned that they're only there for about 2 years. And then they come back and go to church, and their kids go to school with our kids. And the challenge we have, if you kind of envision the facility that Roland just painted a picture of, is by sending them into that type of facility, we're actually in many ways making them worse, not better. Yet we expect them to come back out and live as our neighbors and be better. And so we recognize as a state and as lawmakers that that is a model that's broken and doesn't work. And so this last year, as well as in years past, we've really started to change the trajectory of where we want this part of our criminal justice system to go, and our corrections system in particular. And the reason for that is, as taxpayers, it's not in our best interest to have what we have happening now. 67% of the people that are admitted into prison today have already been in prison before. They're parole violators. And we don't have the types of facilities in Draper right now to adequately deal with substance abuse issues, to deal with mental health issues, and to get people educated so they can be self-reliant when they go back to society. And so there's tremendous cost savings to the taxpayers, somewhere in the neighborhood north of $500 million, we think, by getting people more prepared to re-enter and reintegrate into society. The state Division of Facilities and Construction Management has estimated just this last year that there are over $230 million worth of repairs just to keep the hodgepodge of buildings we have in Draper running. That's not to replace the buildings and make them the types of facilities we need to get people the treatment that they need and the education they need. It's just to keep the same crappy buildings the way that they are right now. That repair doesn't help us actually do the types of programming that we need to get people prepared. So the other issue we've got in Draper is that the experts that we've talked with, and some people think these numbers are actually low, because of the unique geographical considerations of where that particular parcel of ground is, probably generates in the neighborhood of 30,000 jobs, $100 million a year of tax revenue, and $2 billion a year of economic activity because of the unique tech nature of that part of the state. And I know that there are some here tonight that would disagree with that, but that's what the experts that we've relied upon have told us. So anyway, I'll just keep going if that's all right.
Please continue, Representative, that's fine.
So, and why don't we just rebuild it in Draper? I think that was one of your questions.
Right.
Well,
why not remodel the existing
remodel
facility,
it.
build
Yeah,
it on
we've
the
talked
same
about
site?
the remodeling, and why we can't rebuild it in Draper is an interesting question as well. Right now, the state owns 698 acres in Draper. The current facility occupies 456 of those acres, leaving
Go ahead.
leaving about, we're going to get through this a little faster if we can just answer the questions. So, and if some of you would like to
Thank
talk
you.
with us
If
after.
somebody does want to
so-
ask a question, maybe we can get somebody to
Yeah,
give you a card,
so-
and you can give that in. Please continue, Representative. Excuse me, if you want to write that down, we can certainly see if we can answer it through the process. So, Representative, do you want to continue?
So,
So we can get moving. There are a lot of people here that really want to hear this information, and so can we give them an opportunity to do that, please? Please go ahead. Go ahead.
so all I can hear is yelling. I'm not sure what the questions are, but so we've.
Go ahead.
So, Alexis, we've got a whole stack of questions here, and out of respect for everyone, we'll.
That's all right. We're fine. If, like I said, there are a lot of people who want to listen to these answers.
Citizens, this is our opportunity to have these guys answer the questions. There's a moderation that's got to go on, so if you got a question, fill out the forms, and let's at least get the answers. This is more than we've gotten in 2.5 years, so allow these gentlemen the opportunity to answer your questions, because we're as interested as you guys are in the answers. But we got to be somewhat respectful here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
So, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mayor. So, I'm not sure where I was, but we've got about 698 acres in Draper. 450 of those acres are occupied by the current facility, and the remaining 200 acres have some real challenges to them. We've got a major utility corridor going through part of it, as well as some water on part of it. So it's not really feasible to just build another prison on the remaining parcel. And then you're dealing with a challenge of tearing down a facility and building a facility simultaneously, and it's impractical to do that because you don't have a place to put the current inmates. And we've already talked about this, but the state and the legislature's also determined that we would forego the economic development opportunity that would exist there. So that's the kind of long and short of that long answer.
So when there's an accident or construction on I-80, traffic can come to a standstill. How do you plan to get any prisoner transport vehicles off the interstate, or do you just plan to leave the inmate and transport staff sitting out on the interstate? Roland, why don't you start that one? Roland, why don't you start with that one, and then Bob, maybe we can talk a little bit about transportation. Roland?
So that's something we face really every day, whether we're traveling down the I-15 corridor or we're traveling between different jails.
Can we ask you to please refrain from any outbursts, and maybe we can get an answer to the question, and maybe we can get through this big stack. Thank you. Go ahead.
So it's something that we face every day. If we have a situation like that where we have inmates that are out on a particular corridor, like a highway or something like that, we obviously would send out our support, plus we also coordinate with the law enforcement agencies, including UHP, to be able to provide any additional support that we would need. So part of that transport, that occurs every single day, is in preparation for that. Our officers are trained to be able to handle those situations. So it's something that we really deal with every day.
Bob, can we talk a little bit about the transportation studies?
Most of the transportation studies that we're looking at for this project are about local traffic, getting traffic for visitors and staff to and from the facility. But I think the broader question here is really safety and security as a result of some of the more recent shutdowns of I-80. And those are really unpredictable. But I think, as Roland was pointing out, this is an agency that has been transporting inmates long distances for a variety of purposes on a regular basis. I think one of the members of the department mentioned to me last month that there may be 1,700 to 2,000 movements of inmates to courts and medical facilities on a monthly basis. So they're very, very aware of risks of weather, risks of traffic, risks of unpredictable shutdowns and things of that nature. I'm confident that the department is well equipped with contingency plans for any type of an event, foreseen or unforeseen. But I think this has really just been heightened by the accident and the weather condition that has occurred in the last month or two. But again, I think these are wake-up calls for all of us about making sure that we have a plan in place if the facility comes to Grantsville.
When you move the state prison, how are you going to move the sweat lodge? That has been an issue, I know, in the past. Roland, do you want to address that?
That's something we would coordinate with the American Indian leaders to be able to move that site. They obviously will have things that they will do to, in a sense, retire that particular site, and then we would have another one that would be put together at our new location.
Is the PRC prepared for a lengthy legal battle with Grantsville City, which has passed a resolution prohibiting any correctional facility exceeding 249 beds? Let's try and get to the answer to the question. Is the PRC prepared for a lengthy legal battle with Grantsville City, which has passed a resolution prohibiting any sewer or water services to be provided to the prison? One of our, Mr. Griffith.
I don't believe it's this PRC that would run any legal battle with anyone. The PRC's assignment is to make a recommendation to the legislature. The legislature will vote on that recommendation. Will go to the governor's office. Any legal issues will be taken up with the state or with the attorney general's office.
And let me just add to that as well. As much as we don't want to, if we have to build on-site water supply and on-site wastewater treatment systems, we will. The properties that we're looking at are large enough to accommodate that, and that'll avoid the kind of legal challenge I think people are suggesting here. But the fact of the matter is, and as I said from the very beginning, the commission in the state of Utah, I think, wants to very much to partner with the local community on water and sewer service, not get involved in legal battles, but there is a solution that doesn't involve the local community if forced.
Why was no consideration made with regard to flying prisoners to other states, state-of-the-art facilities? An example, Tent City, Arizona. Roland?
I'm sorry, Alexa, I couldn't hear your question.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? Why was no consideration made in regard to flying prisoners to other state-of-the-art facilities like the Tent City in Arizona?
Typically we don't transfer inmates from state to state. We do from time to time, especially if there's some sort of conflict of interest. For example, the inmate that killed one of our correctional officers years ago, we removed him from the state. That's not common practice. California does it because they're so overcrowded. They actually contract with different states to be able to hold them or house them for them. In our case, we've been able to work with our county jails, work also by expanding Gunnison, and been able to have enough beds that we don't need to farm them out or fly them out to another state.
How will relocating the prison to Grantsville enhance the quiet rural community atmosphere, and how will it contribute to economic development?
I'll take the second half of that, the economic development part of it.
You want to answer?
We've been saying from the very beginning that this is going to be a very costly project, and a big part of that cost is going to be the investment needed in infrastructure: water supply, wastewater treatment, power, gas, and telecom. And those are all attributes that any large industry is looking for as well when you want to develop. If the city chooses to partner with the state and take advantage of those investments in infrastructure, it's going to make itself a bit more desirable and probably a bit more competitive vis-a-vis other communities in the state when it comes to trying to attract economic development. If you rely on the systems you've got today, which are in all fairness antiquated and nearing capacities, you're not going to have that competitive advantage that you're looking for. We think the investment in the facility and the investment in infrastructure will benefit the community with respect to its economic development goals, recognizing that the city decides what developments take place and how they take place and where they take place. So you can control growth and development going forward, but without the infrastructure as the underpinning, you're not at a competitive advantage, and you're not going to get the kind of industries and job growth and economic development that I think you're looking for.
Senator Stevenson, did you want to add to that? Okay. What percentage of the $94.6 million in tax revenue will go toward repaying the state taxpayers for the prison move? Bob?
What's being referred to is a study that was included as part of the master plan done in 2014. And the question that the Prison Relocation and Development Authority had at the time was, if the prison was relocated and the property was redeveloped, what would be some of the benefits that the state would accrue? Clearly, the sale of the property or the lease of the property is one aspect of it, but the long-term benefits to redeveloping that property are really in the annual tax revenues that the state and local governments would get from the development that would take place. So we came up with a land use scenario relying on local real estate developers and the like who know the market conditions in the Draper area and know the bigger national and statewide picture when it comes to economic development, developed a land use scenario that involved a mixed-use development on that property. Residential uses, retail uses, offices, light industrial, things of that nature. And based on that scenario, we came up with an estimate of how much construction value would be invested in that property, how many years it would take to build out completely that property. And at the end of that build out, and based on that investment, and based on the number of employees that would likely work there, what would be the tax benefits to the federal government, the state government, local governments? The $94.6 million that's being referred to is what the annual state and local tax revenues would be based on the development of the property under the scenario we came up with at full build out. So if you reduce the number of residential units on the property and you boost offices, you've got more employment, you get more tax revenues in that regard. So you can play with that scenario in a number of different ways, but the one that we thought made the most sense and was most driven by market conditions at the time came up with a scenario that at full build out, the state and local governments would generate about $94.6 million a year. What wasn't mentioned in the report is the federal government is actually the big winner in all of that, but about $145 million a year annually in income taxes. So the property has enormous potential with respect to jobs, income, economic activity, and tax benefits to the state and local governments and the feds.
The basis of this move has been centered on reform. I've not seen anything aside from an updated facility to speak to this. Getting rid of razor wire is not reform. What money is being spent for actual reform? Ron, do you want to answer that?
In the past general session, the legislature passed the most comprehensive set of criminal justice reforms that have ever been passed in the state of Utah, and appropriated an additional $14 million in resources for those reforms. Those resources are intended to make sure that we are reducing crime. If we want to reduce crime, the reality is we have to treat the causes of crime. We have to treat those who commit crimes like people who have problems. It absolutely does not excuse their criminal behavior. It does not mean they are not accountable. But if somebody has a substance use disorder, if somebody has a mental health disorder, we will treat those. So the money that the legislature appropriated helps the Department of Corrections, and it helps counties, local governments, in treating those offenders who have been convicted of crimes. It helps establish transition plans so that those who have been released from prison and are now back in our communities living with us are more likely to succeed than they would have been without the transitional support. It makes sure that those who have been convicted of a crime and are on probation, for example, have not been sentenced to prison, have the resources that they need to help them be successful in the community. What we're trying to do is lower the rate of those who are convicted of a crime and then fail on probation, fail on parole, and get sent to prison. We're trying to stop that cycle of people repeatedly cycling through the criminal justice system, costing us tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The legislature appropriated what really is a very significant investment in providing resources to the Department of Corrections. Half of that money, at least half of that money, goes directly to local governments to do the same thing in reducing crime in your communities.
Why is the state thinking of buying ground? They own so much ground, it seems like a waste of money. Senator Stevenson?
As we started through this process, the first place we looked was, we asked CITLA to look and see if we had a parcel of property we could put this on that would have utility access and all the things that we needed. The second thing we did, when we found out that we didn't have a parcel of that type of property, is we went to a offer to where we were a willing buyer of a parcel of property, and we were looking for a willing seller. Through that process, we had 50 sites submitted over a two-step process, and that has now been whittled down to 4 sites. That's how this came about, and it's all, again, it's the willing seller attached to a willing buyer.
We've got quite a few questions around security, safety and security, so we're going to go through these now. By not simply building the new prison on undeveloped land at the current location, you'll be required to transport 4,000 plus prisoners from Draper to the new location. What steps will be taken to protect the general public from any escape attempts? Nolan?
So we did this with Salt Lake County when we moved from 4 South and 3rd East to 33rd South and 9th West. It's a cooperative effort, and it begins immediately upon the forming of a transition team that begins to develop how are you going to move inmates, how are you going to move staff, how are you going to move equipment, and so on. That collaborative effort begins immediately. You use all the different law enforcement agencies that are involved in that transport. We also would involve federal agents and so on to be part of that. So it's something that's planned well in advance. In fact, we did a really good job in Salt Lake County with that. We thought that we were going to do one day, one particular group of inmates, probably our most difficult. We thought it was going to take us the majority of the day to do it. We were able to do it in 45 minutes to an hour. So then we just ramped up and moved that plan forward and got everything moved in one day rather than 3 days. So it's a long process. It takes a lot of planning, and it takes the collaboration with all the different law enforcement agencies and communities, also Department of Transportation and different things like that regarding thoroughfares, highways, also railroads, those different types of things.
How many inmates have escaped from the Draper prison in the past 5 years?
In the past 5 years, none. The last time that we've had an escape from the Draper facility was over 2 decades ago.
Brad, this is a question for you, another part of that question. That number is based on the current configuration of the prison. If you rebuild with a different configuration and don't include high walls and tall towers, how does that make a new prison safer for nearby communities?
Well, let me just back up a little bit. Towers are no longer used in the construction of new prisons for a number of reasons. One, they're very inefficient. Draper has 7 towers. They have to be manned around the clock, so that means you need 5 staff, actually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to man each tower. It's 35 total staff only dedicated to a tower. New technology in the last 10 years with fence detection systems, remote camera systems, sometimes supplemented by roving patrol officers, improve your security on the perimeter. You don't need towers. It's an inadequate and inefficient way to manage the security facility. So technology has just changed that completely in the last 10 or 15 years.
I have a couple questions here about notification of the community in the event of an escape. How will residents be notified of a lockdown or an escape?
Again, it's the same similar response that we've had in regards to others. We work closely with Gunnison City, with the local police departments and so on, to be able to get that information out quickly. It's important for us to be able to get that information out because they can help provide that service to us. So we get that information out as quickly as we can. Again, it's more important that we spend the amount of time on proactive ways of reducing any possible chance of that occurring. So the main thing is that we try and take care of that in advance. Otherwise, we collaborate when those types of things happen. We have very good relationships with the different law enforcement agencies, and we coordinate it just as if we have a manhunt for any other particular reason.
Let me just follow up with a couple of details, though. Technically, how would a community be notified? A small community like where the prison is now, how would they be notified? Similar
to the media here. Oftentimes, we use the media to be able to get that information out. Thankfully, we haven't had something like that, but that would be the immediate way to get the most information out as quickly as possible.
Grantsville has experienced an unfortunate incident where a Washington parolee shot an innocent high school girl and another woman on his way out of town in 2004. Do you feel that Grantsville has the resources to prevent another incident like this concerning parolee integration in our community?
You want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
As I mentioned before, the inmates that we will keep in the facility won't stay. They won't stay in the communities where the prison is unless they already live there. That is a horrible tragedy, and I don't know that we can ever predict where or how that's going to happen. But the one thing that we do try to do is to go through extreme measures to make sure that we are protecting the communities that we put our parolees and probationers in. There's always that chance, because oftentimes, as they've mentioned, 97% of the people that we get return to the communities. However, I believe that person, as you mentioned, was passing through or leaving the state, and that's a difficult thing to predict. So some of those things, I don't know that there's a good answer to it. It's a reality of some of the things we're talking about. But I think the things that we're trying to improve in regards to their transition back to the community, the programming and so on, the education and job skills can give these guys some hope and hopefully turn some of them around.
We've talked a little bit about this, but this is a little bit of a nuance on this question. Name 3 improvements a new prison will have to reduce recidivism that can't be accommodated at the Draper's site. And I think it's worth talking about this one again. Brad, you want to talk about that?
I can name some of them if Roland wants to chime in on it also. Currently, the facility lacks adequate space to provide programming that's needed. So imagine trying to do some mental health programming in a hallway with staff walking through and other inmates walking through. That's some of the situations they're dealing with. Some of the rooms are so small they can't fit enough inmates in there, so there's a long waiting list for inmates to get into the programming that's helpful for them to benefit. One of the other keys is how do you manage the inmates? How do you supervise them? For years, the way we managed them is that staff sat in an enclosed room in the housing units with windows all around and observed inmates and tried to observe what they were doing. What we found was that inmates generally control the housing units when that's the situation, and that there's a large amount of violence that can occur in those situations. So what's changed in the last 10 years is something called direct supervision, where the officer is plucked out of that enclosed room and placed in the middle of the units for medium and minimum security inmates. They interact with the inmates on a daily basis. They provide services. They answer questions, and inmates get used to asking questions. The officers find out what's going on before it becomes a real problem. And direct supervision has been shown to be effective in reducing violence, improving the safety and security of staff and the inmates there and the volunteers who also may be in the area, and improving the outcomes of the inmates who are in the facility.
Ron, do you want to add to
A critical component of the reform package that I mentioned earlier is the idea of case planning. So as soon as an individual is convicted of a crime, the Department of Corrections establishes a case plan that addresses that individual's very specific needs and risks, and then that plan follows the offender throughout the entire process. So we do a better job of focusing on their specific needs. The current prison, the reality is, it is not built to do case planning. It's not built for correctional officers to interact with inmates. It's not built for correctional officers to provide any assistance to the inmates in dealing with any of the problems that they have, the risks that they have, or the needs that they have. And so even though sometimes we get frustrated at the idea of providing services to inmates, if we want them to be better when they are released, if we do not want them to return to our communities and continue to commit crime, then we need a design that facilitates these types of services that we're talking about. And so design really does matter. Design is critical. The design of the current facility will not allow the type of changes that we're seeking.
How many members of the PRC decision makers are developers on the board of development companies or have stock in development companies and stand to profit personally from the development of the current prison property? Let's address the question. You all want to hear what the answer is, so. Senator Stevens, did you want to address that one? Either one of you?
The answer to the question is none. Excuse me, Representative Wilson builds homes in Davis County. I have no interest in development of property in any of the areas that we're talking about. I do own property, but it's all in Davis County. And I don't know that any of the other members of the PRC has an interest. Actually, in fact, the law, I think, prohibits the PRC, when we adopted put this commission together, that is prohibited right in the legislation, that anyone can have an interest in a company that has any parcel of property is tied to or can work in conjunction with the PRC Commission or the construction of the facilities.
So you're saying that was a separate piece of legislation?
It's actually right in the PRC legislation.
Do you want to repeat that?
I say it's right in the PRC legislation that we can't participate.
As I see it, relatives of felons relocate to Grantsville to be closer to their relatives. I think we've answered this a little bit about when people get released, but let's proceed with this. When the felon is released, they will likely move in with their relatives and become probably a useless citizen of our community. Others with nowhere to go will be on our streets and homeless. Roland?
I think we've already answered it. The only people that are going to come here are the ones that have their family already in this particular area. And oftentimes they turn to the people within their family that are their very best. Unfortunately, in fact, in my case, oftentimes, my parents are called when someone in our family gets in trouble. But when it comes to them staying in this particular area, they'll only stay here if that's where they come from, if that's where their family lives, if that's where they're going to try to find their work, where they've been living prior to going into incarceration.
Mayor Blackham, could you maybe speak to your experience in Gunnison? As far as
Release of
releasing
inmates?
and staying in the
No,
community?
none of the inmates are released in Gunnison. As I understand it, like the director said, they're released from the county of origin or wherever they come from. But no, we don't have any.
What does the $470 million 7-year revenue bond mean to taxpayers? Will my taxes go up? Representative Wilson?
So Utah is one of only half a dozen states or so that has and has always had a AAA bond rating. And one of the reasons for that is we pay our bonds off faster than almost every state. And Senator Stevenson alluded to this in terms of the structure of the funding. But to just sort of simplify it, you'll notice when we did our budget this last session, we didn't appropriate any additional ongoing money to pay for the bonds for the prison, and that's because we're retiring bonds from other state projects so quickly that the ability of the state to pay for the new prison is more than enough covered by the amount of ongoing bonding capacity we already have and we already pay for.
So a follow-up question, if somebody just said, will my taxes go up?
No. So we actually have already paid for the new prison in the budget we just passed this last session, and there were no tax changes at the state level made for the new facility. So.
Neighboring states, for example, Nevada, have their prisons located in remote areas, thereby minimizing impact to populated communities. If moving this prison is a must, why move it within the Grantsville city limits or a 30-mile radius, where the overall negative impact will be huge?
I'll take that question. I think this is a continuation of a conversation that we started during the open house. The individual was referring to a remote rural facility near Reno, and the fact of the matter is there are some very remote facilities around the country. But the vast majority of them are locations where visitors and the workforce and others who interact with the facility can find housing and amenities and services and things of that nature. The vast majority of the facilities that I've cited have relied upon the local community to provide services and amenities and become a partner and a neighbor to the facility, as a facility will be a neighbor and a partner to the town. So we can pick out isolated locations and use them as some sort of an example, but the specifics about why a facility was designed and built, where it was built, how it was built, who it houses, are very, very unique decisions to very specific circumstances. We think that we've got the right approach here in Utah for this facility in terms of its inmates, the workforce, the volunteers, the visitors, and the community amenities and services that it will rely upon. So there's no comparison to a single isolated rural facility in Reno, Nevada, to what the state's trying to accomplish here.
Ron?
The state of Utah could choose to locate in some very remote location. We could do that. But you have to understand, we all have to understand that we have choices and we have some trade-offs along with all those choices. We can either locate in a remote location and do nothing to reduce the likelihood of those individuals cycling through the criminal justice system, or we can locate the facility in an area where volunteers are there, where the individuals have the opportunity to learn skills and become productive upon release to lower their risk of reoffending. But you can't have both. You can't have both a prison in a very remote location and have the opportunity to provide the skills and the resources and the interventions that are necessary to help them once they get out, which almost all of them do, and become part of our communities again.
Two-part question. The Grantsville location is 30 miles from downtown courts and medical facilities. How much will the extra travel and prison transport cost the state? Bob, is that? Take that one?
Good question, because we've been talking about that as a matter of fact. I mean, we're trying to cover as many different bases as we can here. And when I learned a couple of weeks ago that there are as many as 1,700 or more inmate movements coming out of Draper to courts around the state, medical facilities in Salt Lake City and the like, it kind of turned on a light bulb that says we need to really look at how these facilities in these four different locations, can be affected by all that travel. And we've started collecting information to try to get a sense as to where those movements occur, what distances are involved in travel time, how many inmates move, how many staff go along with them, and try to get a handle on the additional or the more or less travel that will take place at any one of these facilities. So we don't have the answer yet, but we saw the same question that the author of that question has just raised.
Second part of that question is, how does the extra vehicle traffic impact Utah's clean air goals? Senator Stevenson?
As we're going through this process, and that is a great question, we have thought of that, and as we look at all the 5 sites or 4 sites we're now considering, as we look at those, there are gives and takes on every site. We've got, if you start out with the cost of the land, if you look at the cost of putting infrastructure, where are the current highways to a parcel, how do we get people to and from, where are medical facilities? You keep asking these questions, and we keep coming up with answers, and all sites have pluses and minuses. And so as we accumulate those, we think we'll come up with what will be a value site to the state of Utah and the taxpayer of Utah. We'll have a site that I wish we could just have one jump out at us. But as we go through this process, we have to do an evaluation, and we have to look at each one of these things, and certainly miles driven is one of them. If I could just answer a bit of a question that was asked a few minutes ago, and that was about the security. You know, over a given period of time, you'll have a lot of really good state employees that would move to Grantsville if the prison were located here. And in that process, you would probably have a higher per capita of law enforcement officers in your community than maybe any place else in the state. And certainly adds to the security of a community. So, you know, there are gives and takes on every one of these questions, and there are gives and takes on every question you're asking tonight. Thank you.
How much of the mental health needs of the inmate population will the county be responsible for providing? Ron or Roland?
The counties don't provide the mental health care inside of our institution. That is something that we provide and that is funded through our budget.
Will the noise and shock waves from Tooele Army Depot, I can't read this, Army Depot, blasting be considered in the design of the new prison?
Let me take the first shot, and anybody else can join in on
Sorry,
that one
I
as
couldn't read
well.
that question.
What the individual is referring to there is, you know, it sort of goes back to the original question, why did we consider locating the facility at any part of the Army Depot base? We got very excited at the idea that maybe that was going to be an alternative that we would want to consider, large amounts of land, infrastructure to a certain degree in place. And we spent quite a bit of time with the base commander and others at the base there to get a real good solid understanding as to what the mission is going forward, what the risks are in terms of having munitions and inmates in proximity to each other. And I think what the person is referring to is that part of the mission that's going to be occurring there now and in the future involves the detonation of obsolete ordnance. And I can go into the specifics of how many rounds and how size of the rounds and things of that nature, but the bottom line is that as far away as this building is from that base, you do feel ground shaking, and you do have windows rattle, and you do feel the effects of that mission that they have there. A big part of the reason why we didn't consider building the facility there is that it would only put inmates and guards and visitors in proximity to munitions that are highly unstable and are there to be detonated, but it would also put the facility in much closer proximity to where this detonation takes place. So we understood it, we recognized it, we think we're far enough away, and frankly, the construction of the facility is going to be a lot different than the construction of a home or a typical business you have in town here. This is a heavy, solid block concrete construction that we're confident that, you know, with the right design and construction methods, won't have any effect or feel any effect of the detonation that's going to take place there. That detonation is going to only take place for maybe 10 or 15 years. We have a much longer period of time on our time horizon as well. But we looked at that, we understood the issue, and we're confident we're not going to be adversely affected.
Two-part question, but I'm going to ask it as one question. And Brad, it's for you. So, who gets to design the prison, one, and will the community get to have input into how it looks and functions?
Well, let me answer the first one. I don't know who's going to design it. That's up to the state to put out a request for proposal to hire an architectural firm to do the design. So that's going to be an open bid process, and any company that wants to bid on that can bid on it. Second, where the community, any architectural design takes into consideration the environment that the facility is being built in, what it looks like, how it should look in terms of it, how it fits into the local environment is very important. So that will be considered as part of it. I'm sure that having input from those concerned citizens would be a valuable part of that process.
So much land in Tooele County is tax exempt, and the prison will be too. Will the state compensate the county for this? I want to get Mayor Blackham's input as well, but maybe we could ask Representative Wilson or Senator Stevenson.
You know, I thought about this. In fact, I answered this question in Salt Lake last week, and I did a very poor job of it. And I've thought a lot about this, the question you have. You're talking about 500 acres. The answer is that the state doesn't pay taxes, or real estate taxes. And there are a lot of ways to look at real estate taxes and to what they can do for a community, or the not paying of real estate taxes can do for a community. If you look at what's going on that site right now, it's a parcel of agricultural property that generates very little revenue. If you look at the potential of the parcel of property, over the next 20 years, there may be some industry that would be located there that would contribute to the community. There are a lot of different ways of contributing. You know, as I went through this thought process, we have a large government facility. In fact, we have several of them in our community. We at one time, we certainly have Hill Air Force Base now. We had the Naval Supply Depot that's now been converted into a tax-paying entity. But Hill Air Force Base is, I think, 36,000 acres. And so as a result, we have a lot of property in our county that is not paid, pays no taxes. If you go take a look at Salt Lake City, look at the number of entities, government entities, that are in that community that pay no taxes. And it's quite interesting to see where jobs and how a non-paying entity affects a community, but it can affect it very positively. But there's a piece in between a business coming to town and paying their full tax load, or a large government entity coming to town and creating not only the jobs that it creates that pay taxes through purchases and home purchases and all those things, but there's another piece in the middle here that we don't look at sometimes. And it happens in the development of a community, and it's happening in the communities all over the state of Utah. And that is we get into what we call RDAs. And so we invite communities to come to our...
RDA, do you want to explain that?
As a redevelopment agency, we invite those communities to come to our town or our county, and then we give them back a piece of tax increment. And that tax increment could be a lot. But the bottom line is that when you start giving back property tax increment, you don't get money for schools, you don't get money for mosquito abatement districts, you don't get money on anything, or at least unless entities have opted out. It's a very complicated process. There are other ways of things happening. If you could bring a manufacturer here like ATK, they would come to town and they would probably work with the state of Utah, and they would get a payment back to them, at least on the upfront side, of so much per job. And it's the post-incentive. After it's been created, then the state pays them. So this is a complicated process, and taking 500 acres off a property tax roll is not a big deal. And the reason it isn't is because if you look at job creation in your community, that's where basic taxes come from, is job creation. And I can talk all day on that, on the Hill Air Force Base piece.
A little more complicated than just saying...
But it is very
right.
complicated, other than
Okay.
say we're taking that off
Right.
the tax roll.
Okay.
If we were having a discussion here that the MITA, the Military Installation Board, the Tooele Army Depot was going to be mothballed, and the Military Installation Board from the state of Utah were stepping in, all those acres could be put back on the tax rolls. We've done it at Hill Air Force Base. We've done it, and we're working on it at Fort Douglas. There's lots of places that this can work, and Tooele is certainly one of those. So the tax question is just not a simple answer for anyone, but 500 acres of property tax for a state prison is not a big issue.
Can we ask Mayor Blackham how that worked in Gunnison, as far as the state compensating the county for any tax-exempt land?
I promise I'll take less than 1 minute, but let me just answer that. No, that the property that they originally used and is present within their ownership was on Greenbelt. In other words, it was like $3 or $6 an acre. And then Gunnison, they bought some of the property, and then Gunnison City gave them some of the property. The trade-off that we saw, let me just indicate, we understood that, we recognized that right off. The trade-off we understood was jobs, professional jobs with intelligent people, good hardworking people. Let me just say in relation to the jobs, one of the greatest impacts that Gunnison City and our valley and our area has experienced is not from offenders or their families, it has been from employees. And the positive effect that you can have, that we have experienced, by having good, honest, hardworking people with jobs that pay benefits and retirement that they train for, that they have to have background check for, that impact has had a tremendous, wonderful, good effect on us. So that was the trade-off for that Greenbelt property.
What about hospital services? The only hospital in the area is in Tooele. There are only 2 ambulances in Grantsville. Roland?
We face that challenge every day, and we oftentimes obviously have to take them up to the University of Utah Hospital. What we do know, though, is with the right facilities built, we can improve being able to take care of inmates right there in the facility by, for example, having enhanced medical care, health services there available to us. We also contract outside with a private ambulance service so that it doesn't affect like the city of Draper and so on. We average, I think, approximately 79, no, that was something else, I'm sorry. But the transportation piece is handled by our contract with a private provider.
Why not dedicate the largest public works project of Utah to education, meaning building new schools? Let me get a little bit back up there. The question is, let's get through, this is an interesting question, so let's get through this. They're saying that there are some schools that are older than the prison. Why not dedicate the largest public works project of Utah to education and not a prison? Representative Wilson?
So, this is kind of a complicated answer, but we fund education in the prisons through different funding mechanisms. We'd had an interesting session, this last session we just wrapped up. We had the biggest increase in funding for education in probably decades in the state. We increased funding for public education over 9% from the prior year. And I agree. I mean, part of the question, I think the underlying tone of the question is, why don't we fund education more? And we need to. There's no question we don't fund it enough. I have 3 kids in public education, and their classes are too big, their teachers aren't paid enough, and their schools aren't nice enough. So I get that. The challenge we've got with this, though, is that we have a dilapidated hodgepodge facility that is costing taxpayers a lot of money. And we've already talked about the $500 million or more that will save taxpayers over the next couple of decades by having a facility that allows us to implement the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that Ron and Roland have spoken about. So, and that is without the opportunity that might come from job creation through the economic development opportunities that exist where the current site is. So, you know, when you talk to me or other members of the PRC or other members of the legislature that have been supportive of this, we understand there are concerns in some of these communities that are potentially going to receive the prison. And we want to be sympathetic to those concerns. But we also have a role as lawmakers to look at what's in the best interest of the state. And we think that having a significant investment in justice reinvestment, reducing this revolving door that we've talked about, that Ron has addressed, as well as creating jobs is the right strategy for the state. And I'm going to just go back to a question that was asked earlier, because I think that one of the things we haven't talked enough about tonight is the value of this process that members of the PRC get out of coming here tonight. We don't have all the members of the PRC here. A few of them are here in the audience, and they'll all get the information that you've shared. But contrary to maybe what some people think, I've learned a lot here tonight so far. And there are some issues that some of these thoughtful questions have brought up that I'm going to go back and ask our consultants to dig into and look at. And there are pros and cons, if you will, to each site. And there are concerns that you have that are unique to this Tooele site. and we want to be sensitive to those and make sure we understand them fully. Just like last week when we were in Salt Lake City, there were some issues brought up there that we weren't fully aware of and or were educated more in depth on. So this is an interesting process for us, and we'll take all this information and over the course of the summer months evaluate what we find and the things we learn through this process and keep going through it. So thank you.
On the funding for the schools that my good partner here has talked about, that number, when he says we increased that 9%, that's close to the number that it would take to build the prison in 1 year. And that was given to our schools, and not only was it given to them, but it's given to them in ongoing money. So that means we've got to come up with that next year, and we will also have to take care of the growth that's taking place in our school system next year. So we're very cognizant of what's going on in the schools, and we have demands in higher education. We have demands in state government that are, you look at the Attorney General's office or our legislative council that works with us. All of those things we're having increased demand because we have an increase in a growing population in the state of Utah. And I would certainly agree with Brad. This has been an amazing process to work through. I know more about prisons than I ever thought I would know, but it's been a learning process, and I think very worthwhile the way we've gone about it. And I think right now the way we're approaching this, your community probably has about a 25% chance of landing a prison. Whether it's higher than that, I don't know. I don't think so, because we're going through this to try to create the value that we will on these particular sites. So I would hope that as emotional as this has gotten, there are many of you that hope we can be friends after this is over with. So but it has been an amazing process for us to look at and go through.
How many community members, non-prison employees, are needed to maintain programs at the prison, i.e. professional counselors, legal counsel, religious volunteers for worship services? Colin?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, we have about 1,200 volunteers that assist us with the Department of Corrections there. The exact number of psychologists, social workers, and so on, I don't have that exact number. We have approximately 800 employees at the Draper site that provide those types of, from correctional officers to clerical staff and so on.
And just to clarify that the community prison population required to maintain that is considered in the decision-making, is that right, as far as proximity? Is that right?
It is.
Okay. How will prison employees be compensated for their added expense due to the relocation?
I really love that question. That is exactly what we as correctional officers would be asking for. You know, that's again been part of the process. As you can imagine, from a Department of Corrections point of view and as an advocate for the employees, we've really wanted to make sure that we kept it close. And those are things that we will have to consider down the road, depending on the distance and the impact and stuff that has on our employees. Again, we went and fought for additional raises for those folks, and the legislators were fantastic in their response to that. I think the same types of things at least should be considered in regards to travel and so on. There are other prisons and correctional facilities across the country that have incentivized those types of things to get people to move a little bit closer. So that's really a home run as far as a correctional officer is concerned. To get the very best, you have to pay for it.
It's been stated that there could possibly be some jobs added because of the prison operations. Could you identify the type and wages of jobs that you're referring to?
I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to, but what I can tell you, for example, is the additional investment in justice reinvestment, such as the teaching, such as the job skill development, and so on. Most of it is correctional officers as well. As Brad already talked about, direct supervision will be the type of prisoner management we will be using in that facility, which is where you have the correctional officers work right inside the facility right inside the units with the inmates. So I'm not sure what additional jobs would be available. Obviously, if some people, if we moved too far away and they didn't feel like it was worth their travel to be able to come, then we would obviously have more openings that way. But we're really trying to keep all of our employees that we currently have the best we can.
Will the economic benefit of the sale of the Draper site flow on or and be spent in Grantsville? Let's see, if we were selected as the site. So we're talking about whether the sale of the site in Draper would be a benefit to Grantsville.
And the answer to that is we don't know. And the reason is because as we've looked through the Draper facility and we looked at some of the outcry that was taking place as we went from the Prada to the PRC, we literally separated the decision of what to do, the final decision on what to do with the Draper site from the relocation. And so the answer to the question is that we will start through a process. My guess is it will be the next legislative session, and there will be a commission put together to determine what the disposition of the Draper site is. And we will work through that, and there will be a lot of players. I think we will have Governor's Office of Economic Development, certainly the cities that are touched. There's 2 counties involved, and I think everyone will come together, and we will go through a hearing process to identify what the highest and best use for that property is and how the property would be marketed. All we know is we've had an appraisal done on the site, and we know about what it's worth today or what it was worth a year ago. And we do know that we've had an economic development study done on the site, and we know that it would create approximately $1.8 billion in economic activity. So that's where we're to. There really isn't a definitive, there's not a definitive on where that property and how it will be disposed of, and there's not a definitive on where the money would go once it's disposed of. That's to be determined.
In the event of an earthquake, how will the new prison stand up, and can you guarantee the safety of our town?
Fundamental to the project will be the correct design and having architects and engineers involved in the design of the facility that are knowledgeable of local codes, standards here in Utah, what the risks are in various places of faults and earthquake activity and things of that nature. But this is true anywhere in the United States. Anyone who's developing an institution, whether it be a prison or school or medical facility, has to recognize some of the risks that are inherent there. Nowadays, weather is becoming more and more of a factor, but certainly earthquakes is one of those. But the selection of the right architects, the right engineers, adherence to standards and codes should be sufficient to guarantee the success of the facility.
Just to add to those thoughts, a typical response, our emergency response for correctional facilities is oftentimes to bunker in place. I'm actually more concerned with the Draper site at this point if we have an earthquake, of the safety and security of that. New facilities, you're able to, oftentimes that's the very safest place to keep everyone. You can often be able to stay right there, maybe move a unit or 2 of inmates around. So it's very much more secure than the average facilities in your community.
If the site next to the Walmart distribution center is chosen, is the state ready to buy the 41 homes right across the street, less than 1 mile away? Let's see if we can get a response to that. Since all the residents will want to move, will the state pay the actual market value? Who would like to take that one?
So the state won't be buying property adjacent to any site we choose, but kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. One of the things we'll evaluate through this process is what are potential impacts on adjoining property owners at all the different locations that we have. So.
Okay. How will the prison affect local law enforcement?
Actually, the impact is fairly minimal. For example, Draper City hasn't had to respond more than about 2 times in the last 5 years to our correctional facility. We handle the majority of our events and the things that take place with our own law enforcement and corrections officials. Anytime we have, for example, an inmate death, by statute, the county sheriff is responsible to for us to report those things to them. We currently have an agreement with Unified Police, which is Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, where they handle some of the major cases such as a suicide or an inmate death. I think we looked back over the last, from 2009 to 2014, and there'd been about 28 of those particular incidences where Unified Police responded to handle those types of crime scenes.
There's a second part to that question. They're not really related, but Bob, this might be something that you can answer. How will the public lands used widely by our community that surround the site be impacted?
Well, if we're talking about the site in Grantsville, it's owned by a single owner. It consists of many thousands of acres of land, of which a small percentage of which we need for our facility. We've been saying from the beginning that we're looking for a site of about 500 acres. And if you looked at some of the drawings and maps that were in the open house, you'll see that we're talking about siting the 500-acre footprint, so to speak, in the interior part of the property, well away from the roads and neighboring property owners and things of that nature. To my knowledge, the property owner dictates who's allowed on his property and for what purpose and the like. The state, if it acquires 500 acres at that site, will control access to the property and probably prohibit firearms and things of that nature. But aside for all the properties around the property that the prison acquires, that'll be up to the property owner, him or herself, to do what they want to do and to allow whatever they may allow on the property. But to my knowledge, people don't have the right to just use someone else's property without permission, and I think that'll apply going forward as well. But the 500 acres that the state would buy, wherever it may be, they're only going to control what goes on in that property. Anything else outside that acreage is left to the neighboring property owners.
This person is asking about the makeup of the PRC, and as far as the geographic area, how many may live in Draper, how many live in Tooele?
So the Prison Relocation Commission was appointed by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House a year ago, prior to having any pieces of property on the list. And we have, I have to remember where everyone's from. There's no one on the PRC from Tooele County. I mean, that's obviously the answer. So we have Davis County, Salt Lake County, Utah County.
Okay.
So.
Will Tooele County receive any state monies for road and utility maintenance due to increased burden on infrastructure, or will local communities be responsible for these costs? Just the extra burden on infrastructure that a new facility might have.
I'm not so sure what the extra burden is. I think we've been talking all evening about police and fire and emergency rescue and ambulance and things of that nature, and I think Roland and others have been making a pretty convincing argument that there really won't be. But the bottom line is, if this facility ultimately located in Grantsville, there's going to be a partnering that's going to have to take place between the community and the state over how it's built and how it's operated and things of that nature. And I'm sure during that period of time, some of the details, some of the concerns the city may have will be brought to light, and we'll figure out a solution to them. But I think the takeaway from this meeting is that we don't think this facility is going to bring the kind of burdens that some people have suggested will occur in the city. And by example, in Draper and other places, and the mayor of Gunnison, I think, has made a pretty good case as well, that some of the concerns about this burden has really not occurred in Draper and has not occurred in Gunnison.
You claim that having the prison brought to Grantsville will bring economic growth of our choosing. The industries we would like to have here and have spoken with our city leaders have told them they won't come here if the prison does. Isn't that taking our choice away as to what we want here? Who'd like to take that? Want to take that, Bob? Senator Stevenson?
First of all, prisons are very compatible to industrial type development, and that's, I think everyone looks at that site. You've started the process with the Walmart distribution. Those are the kind of facilities that will fill in around that, around a prison. It will the kind of facilities will fill around a Walmart facility, and they're the kind that will fill around any industry that demands a lot of trucking. I I think that a lot of people are looking at the prison as a detriment. I think if you look at the new design, it'll fit an industrial park, and if you're flying over it, you'll think it was a piece of the industrial park. There's not, the downside to this, I think, for the community, this is my opinion. Again, I've served in some of the positions that we have individuals here in, and in my opinion, the community of Grantsville would benefit immensely from a prison location here. And you would do it because people would move here if the staff of the facility would move to the community. Now, it wouldn't happen instantly. You would immediately receive the benefit of what took place with the construction of the facility. People would move close in order to build it. It's a long-term process. It's a 3-year construction. As we go through all of this, you would find that there would be some increases in employment, and contrary to some things I've heard, property values will go up because there's more demand. And you have a lot of property here.
Please.
So
Answer the question,
you put
please.
facility,
Thank
you put infrastructure in, and property values increase.
We have time for a couple more questions. It's almost 9 o'clock, so this one, Ron, why don't you address? We're concerned about rehabilitation and helping inmates reenter society. You state a new prison built somewhere other than Draper is the only way. Why are we not more concerned about prevention and putting money towards our youth?
I guess I don't know why we would ever think that they are, why it's one or the other. It's all part of the same package. And so putting money toward rehabilitation does not mean that we take prevention off the table. It means that people are currently committing crimes, and they will either continue to commit crimes, or we invest in correctional resources to help make sure that they don't commit more crimes. So with that portion of the population, we have to do something about it. If you don't want them to continue to commit crimes, we have to do something about it. That's not incongruent with also investing money in prevention, where we currently have ongoing efforts in prevention. So the simple answer is we are doing both, and we'll continue to do both.
Okay. Don't you think our county is a bit of a dumping ground for things unwanted in Salt Lake? We are too small to fight off every proposal for waste, prison, etc. Tooele County is a great place to live. Please consider that we've done enough to handle the waste, etc.
So, this is a great community, and I have family that lives out here, and I know how good the people are. And this process has been one where we didn't tell our folks that have been out looking for parcels of ground to take anything off the table. They were told to look at every nook and cranny of the state that would fit the criteria we had relative to proximity to volunteers, medical, courts, etc. And so as the process unfolded, there ended up being 2 in Tooele County. Through some of the good work of Representative Sagers and some other things that unfolded, you now have 1 site in your community. But this process has been neutral in terms of what are the other conditions that exist in communities. And like I said earlier, we will take all these things into consideration, the pros and cons of each site, and make a decision sometime later this summer. So, and you do have a number of facilities out here that have provided great benefit to the county at times, and I see and I hear sometimes that they are detriments. We hear that actually from a lot of the other communities that we're talking to, and they feel picked on at times. So we have to kind of look at all these different things, and we'll evaluate them. So.
Can I just follow up on timeline? I think it might be worth talking about what the timeline is. We have 1 more public meeting next week in Eagle Mountain.
Correct.
Public hearing June 16th, and then...
Correct. And then the PRC, the members of the PRC will work over the summer, and a lot of it depends on how quickly we get back all of the study information, geotechnical, utilities studies, et cetera. And once we feel like we've got enough data to make an informed decision, we will start that process. And, you know, the last time we moved to prison in the state of Utah was 65, 70 years ago. And at the time, we did it because we felt like there needed to be a change of location for similar reasons, actually, to what we're dealing with now. But there's new conditions that we're dealing with that we didn't have 65 years ago, and no one on the PRC obviously did it 65 years ago either. So we're not sure exactly what the timeline's going to be. My just best guess is that we'll be mid to late summer to make a recommendation to the governor and the legislature. And then depending on when the governor calls us into special session, we'll determine whether that happens before, you know, school starts or not.
One final question that just came in. With added efficiency with a new facility, will the prison staff be reduced by layoffs? Roland?
There's no plan for any layoffs. We would want to be able to keep as many of those folks as we possibly could, highly trained, professional individuals, and obviously there may be other opportunities for folks wherever we're located to be able to be employed there.
I just add, Alexis, too, there was some information shared earlier. The size of the prison that we intend to build, wherever we build it, is to replace the 4,000 beds that exist in the current facility, the institution we have. In terms of growth of the prison population, this whole justice reinvestment component that Ron has talked about is expected to clip the majority of the growth in the system. And our intention would be that we actually plan on, and Gunnison actually wants us to build more beds in their community, and our intention is to do that. But our intention is not to build a bigger prison than we have in Draper in the new facility. And with the successful implementation of justice reinvestment, we won't have to grow this new facility, so it would be the 4,000 beds. The 7,500 beds that were talked about at the beginning of the meeting today were before justice reinvestment. So
I keep saying it's the last question, then I keep getting handed questions and being told we can keep going. So I'm going to go just a couple more minutes. Why is it that Mayor Becker in Salt Lake disagrees with your statement that the prison will fit in with industrial development?
who do you want to answer that?
Whoever would like, maybe Bob and Representative Wilson. Representative
Let
Wilson,
me
why don't
just
you-
comment, and then Bob can answer the question. Because it's been done all over the country, it works. You can see it. We can get you lots and lots of examples of the way that prison fits in with a large industrial complex or industrial development. So that is, we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're not just saying that. That's a proven, that's a fact.
The senator's absolutely correct. We've got numerous examples where communities were literally recruiting federal prisons to be the anchor tenant in a large business park or industrial park and lay the groundwork for the infrastructure improvements and things of that nature, and then be able to attract other industries. So we've got more than enough examples of how prisons, business parks, and industrial parks can be very, very compatible, mutually supportive, and you know, we're happy to explain that to the mayor of Salt Lake City whenever the opportunity presents itself.
Given the nature of the PRC, why should the public trust their own study of projected financial benefits to moving the prison? And perhaps this gets to any kind of external audit or verification. I think this has come up before of some of the financial benefits.
Is that to me, or who's that to?
Well,
Bob,
let me take the first shot at this. There's been a lot of conversation about the economic impact study, and it's literally about 80 pages of the master plan. So there's a lot of documentation of what was done, how it was done, the methodology, the assumptions, the data, the models, and the outcome. But because there's been a lot of interest and some skepticism, the state, through its Office of Legislative Fiscal Analyst, is looking at that document, doing their own analysis as well, and we're looking forward to seeing what they come out with. But that document that we produced with those numbers that have been cited to this evening is being looked at and being critiqued, and you know, we're confident that what's in that document is very, very defensible.
And Bob, when is that? Sorry, when they might
Well, it's
be
not
done
really
with that
something that
review?
we're involved with. This is something that's being done by another arm of state government, and you know, when they're ready, they'll present their findings to us.
Okay, has the sorry, I can't people see. Has the prison site in Salt Lake County near the airport been considered for the high water table, or the consequences of the high water table been considered in the site in Salt Lake City?
All the sites are going through the same type of analysis, which involves topographic surveys, geotechnical investigations, wetland delineations, biological and ecological surveys, and things of that nature. Every one of the sites presents itself in a very, very unique geologic and physical environment. Every one of those aspects is being looked at, but we recognize, and I think that the senator and the representative both mentioned the pros and cons and trade-offs of different sites: size, configuration, location, subsurface conditions, wetlands, environmental issues, infrastructure issues, neighborhood issues, things of that nature. We're well aware of the circumstances at what we call the 7200 West site in Salt Lake City. The geotechnical program that was designed and implemented at that site recognized the environment within which that site is located, much like we did here in Grantsville, much like we did in Eagle Mountain and elsewhere.
Okay, well, that concludes the question and answer session for tonight. I think that if you have more questions or we didn't get to your questions, you can email your question. The email address, you can pick up these little business cards on the way out at the table as you came in, but the address is prisonrelocation@le.utah.gov. So I'd like to thank each panel member for participating this evening, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of the panel and as a moderator for probing and challenging and interesting questions. I hope that it was a useful experience for everybody here, and a reminder that the feedback from tonight's open house and Q&A session will be compiled, it will be passed on to the PRC, and it will be posted on the Prison Relocation website along with the video of tonight's panel discussion. Remember, the third and final public information meeting is next Tuesday in Eagle Mountain at Frontier Middle School. Thank you for coming, and have a safe trip home.